I would like to start the program with our first keynote speaker, Dr. Aghdaz Afzal. Dr. Dr. Afzal is the program director and assistant professor of economics, social development and policy program at Habib University, Karachi. He holds a PhD in economics and social science and MA economics from University of Missouri, Kansas City, USA. He also did MA in political science and BA in political science and economics from Ohio State University, USA. His expertise lies in the emerging economies, and he has also presented his research in several economic conferences in the United States. The keynote session by Dr. Afzal is on a very instigating topic of post-COVID-19 world, technology, economy, and the state. Dr. Afzal, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the very kind and generous introduction. So I will start my address, and I would be very happy to engage with participants here at the end to see if they have any questions. So please do ask questions, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. So here, ladies, gentlemen, respected faculty and students.
Sir, sorry to interrupt you. We can't hear you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. I'll start again. Ladies, gentlemen, respected faculty and students, my name is Dr. Aghdaz Afzal. I'm the Program Director for Social Development and Policy program. It's a program at Habib University in Karachi. Today, I'm very honored to deliver the keynote address for the first international symposium on building economic resilience against pandemics. I will talk about three broad themes related to pandemics, namely technology, economy, and the state. Of course, I'll be using the example of the most recent pandemic in the shape of COVID-19. But the points that I will share here today are related to pandemics in general, because living under the dark, ominous cloud of a COVID-19-like pandemic has unfortunately become the new normal. Pandemic economics have a logic and urgency of their own. Where COVID-19 is a full-blown public health crisis, it is also the biggest economic crisis in a generation. The pandemic has resulted in major supply-side problems since Chinese manufacturing now occupies a critical position in the global supply chain. Chinese GDP has probably declined by a full 10% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to last year. And mind you, the last time the Chinese economy contracted by the same amount was 40 years ago. Lockdowns, self-isolations, and flight bans, which are now increasingly being lifted, have hit economies hard everywhere from the demand side as well. The Economist magazine reported that international passenger arrival at the 5 biggest American airports was down by 30%. Estimates show that Europe's GDP will contract 12% year on year in the second quarter, while the Japanese economy will contract by 2%. The IMF has already declared a recession and asked countries to employ aggressive policies for countering the COVID-19 economic crisis. A recent report by the United Nations warned that emerging economies like Pakistan will take on an enormous hit in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Among others, given the slowdown in global demand, Pakistani exports are likely to decrease significantly, and we're already seeing that. And this will lead to increasing unemployment and a drop in our foreign exchange earnings. At the same time, plummeting oil prices will also lead to significant job losses for Pakistani migrant labor in the Gulf countries that will further exacerbate overall unemployment and availability of foreign exchange. And if there is a second wave of this pandemic, like the Spanish flu of 1918, then the present economic crisis that we are facing in this country will look like a stroll in the park. On the unemployment front, the government may be able to weather the storm of social unrest through the 1.2 trillion Pakistani rupees economic relief package. But things are likely to come to a head on the financial account side. And we are already seeing that happen. So, declining foreign exchange earnings and rapid capital outflows, which are already underway, will severely constrain Pakistan's ability to service its debt when debt service payments peak later in the year. Prime Minister Imran Khan has rightly highlighted the need for a debt write-off for developing nations like Pakistan due to the global economic crisis in the wake of COVID-19. Without a debt write-off, Pakistan is likely to fall into a lethal debt trap, all but ending hopes of sustained investment in health and education in future. Now, some economists may argue that writing off debt is not a very good thing because it inverts incentives for lenders. But if developing nations, despite their best efforts, are unable to break free from debt traps year after year, then perhaps new thinking is required. Debt write-offs have a very long history. Michael Hudson, an economic historian, shows that redeeming the poor from debt bondage moved alongside the spread of early Christianity. As recently as 1953, Pakistan and 20 other countries wrote off about 50% of Germany's sovereign external debt in the London Debt Agreement. Not only was interest reduced on the remaining portion, but Germany was given a grace period until 1957. These arrangements made interest payments manageable for Germany since it precluded the need for further borrowing just to pay interest on debt. The present economic order was established in the wake of the destruction brought about by the Second World War. So when I say the present economic order, I'm talking about the way WTO, IMF, the United Nations, World Bank, all these institutions operate in the world. This order envisaged a stable and prosperous world without exploitive economic competition. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has badly shaken the existing economic order, and it is threatening widespread economic chaos. This imminent chaos will only worsen in the presence of unrelenting debt service obligations for the developing countries. So I have just made a point that one of the dimensions of COVID-19 is that for emerging economies, it's very important to conceptualize and talk to lending nations about potential debt write-offs. And I'm glad to see that there is more and more people are talking about this, especially in the developing world. My next theme about which I want to talk about is technology. Because remember, I talked about that, the fact that I was going to talk about three broad themes, economics, technology, and the state. So now I'm going to say something about technology. You may remember that it was only December last year when Prime Minister inaugurated the Digital Pakistan initiative. In a series of tweets, the Prime Minister invited leading technology firms from around the world to assist Pakistan with technological innovation. The Prime Minister's focus on technology was not misplaced. Experts agree that technological innovation is the predominant factor underlying social and economic change. Economists also point out that 80% of the income difference between rich and poor nations can be attributed to technology. However, technology is never a substitute for priorities, leadership, and effective policies. We should not pin too much hope on technology. It is a complex phenomenon, with nations failing to improve their socio-economic indicators despite allocating massive funds for technological innovation. Many have questioned the transformative powers of technology. Even when the Industrial Revolution was truly underway, leading economists like Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo did not believe that technology could improve the human condition. Recently, Robert Gordon, he is an economic historian, has warned against putting too much hope in technology. In The Rise and Fall of American Growth, Gordon concludes that economic growth cannot go on forever as the rate of technological innovation has been declining since 1970. At the same time, the introduction of new technology is often a disruptive and violent process. In a recent book, The Technology Trap, Carl Benedict Frey rightly points out that many technologies result in job losses or are labor replacing, is the term that Frey uses, labor replacing. Such labor replacing technologies give rise to violent countervailing forces spearheaded by those who lose their livelihoods. For instance, where the Industrial Revolution has now become synonymous with the introduction of new technologies in economic production, the publication of the Communist Manifesto was also a product of that era. At times, the opposition to new technologies became so violent that it took 12,000 British soldiers to quell the Luddite uprising of 1811 to 16. In case we forget, only a few years ago, Pakistani taxi drivers staged violent protests against app-based cab services, citing jobs and income losses. Here's the point about COVID and technology. Educational institutions in Pakistan have been highlighted as the ideal destination for technological interventions by these champions of technology. The champions argue that technology can provide efficient solutions to problems like shortage of teachers in schools. The government would not need to build any new schools, as students would be able to access the best teachers online while attending school from home. Most importantly, technology can take education to the doorstep of almost 23 million children in Pakistan who are not in school. Like most things in life, it is easier said than done. In order to obtain a decent return on investment for new technologies, a minimum level of basic technical infrastructure is required. So I looked up this data from PSLM HIES 2018-2019, and it revealed a shocking picture. Most households, about 90%, use mobile phones for accessing the internet, which means that they lack reliable and affordable internet access. Only 7.4% of households had Wi-Fi. Additionally, only 7% of households had a computer, and only 1.59% of the households had a tablet. Given such startling lack of technical infrastructure, how can we rely on technology for any solution? On the contrary, evidence shows that bringing online teaching into the students' homes actually amplifies or increases inequality. Not all students can afford internet, and many students lack dedicated learning spaces. In other words, when it comes to education, technology is not the great equalizer it is touted to be. Some people will invariably point out that there is not enough money for providing internet and laptop or tablets to school children in this country. Look, lack of money is not a viable justification for 23 out of school children in Pakistan, 23 million out of school children in Pakistan. In a very interesting book, The Child and State in India, Myron Weiner systematically showed that leading nations, England, Germany, Austria, US, and Japan, prioritized educating children and implemented effective policies to achieve that goal, even when per capita income was low, poverty was widespread, and parents would have employed their children had they been permitted to do so. Weiner underscored the beliefs of Indian elites who thought it was fine to employ poor children as the key reason behind millions upon millions of children not attending school. In short, technology is a complex and a disruptive force. Blindly pushing technology will not result in better education outcomes. The government needs to prioritize school enrollment, lead a sea change in our beliefs, and implement effective policies. My last point. I think I still have some time. And remember, my last point was going to be about the state. So whenever we talk about the state, we are talking about the political institutions in a society. We are talking about the government. I mean, the government and the state are different. The government is something that comes into power through elections, but state is the permanent political institution that you find in any society. So हमारे यहाँ उसको रियासत आप समझ सकते हैं या policy समझ सकते हैं. An interesting thing is that state has now been highlighted as a key policy lever, especially in the post-COVID environment, as far as dealing with issues emanating from COVID-19 is concerned. So this last point that I'm about to make is about the state or economic policy making. So here goes. The secret behind the spectacular success of economists in policy making lies in the innovative nature of economic ideas. Whenever ground realities have changed, economics has been able to offer an answer. During the Great Depression, John Maynard Keynes made a powerful case for fiscal measures for kickstarting the stagnated economy. So when we say fiscal, we are basically talking about giving money directly to people through the Ministry of Finance. Later, as developed countries face stagflation, so it's an interesting term, which is a combination of stagnation and inflation. Milton Friedman, who was also a very famous economist, promoted monetary policy and central bank independence. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating effect on economies and workers in Pakistan. To restart inclusive economic growth, and this goes back to the point that Omar Hernandez was making about inclusive economic growth, Pakistani policymakers will have to borrow a leaf out of the policy innovation playbook. Remember, I'm making a case here for policy innovation. Why? Economic policy innovation is now on full display in the developed world. Though they may have been careful of using the fiscal side in the past, developed nations have channeled massive fiscal stimuluses into their economy. The Economist magazine notes that this year, developed nations have announced $4.2 trillion in fiscal stimulus. This is over 10% of their combined GDP. Many policymakers in the developed world now envision a more significant and permanent role for fiscal policy in future macroeconomic management. So when I talk about fiscal policy, we are basically talking about the role of the state, because fiscal policy is carried out by the Ministry of Finance or one of the institutions of the state. So the argument now is that the government is going to be required to have a very active role in managing the macroeconomy. So this is the new argument that is again rearing its head after many years. Moving on. COVID-19, as I have said before, is an unprecedented economic catastrophe for developing nations, where economic contraction has reversed all the progress against poverty reduction in the last 23 years. The World Bank's downside scenario estimates that COVID-19 will push between 49 and 57 million people into poverty in South Asia. 57 million. 5.5 crore. Though the World Bank did not provide country-wise numbers, Dr. Hafiz Pasha and Shahid Kargar estimated that 15 to 20 million Pakistani, 2 crore Pakistanis, could slip into poverty due to COVID-19. This alarmingly high number of poverty should have spurred Pakistani policymakers into action, because poverty is not intrinsically unpleasant, but such huge magnitude of poverty foretells or gives the signal for massive, unrelenting, and devastating social unrest. Strangely, economic policy innovation has been absent in Pakistan. The government claims to have injected a fiscal stimulus of 1.24 trillion into the economy. Even when this amount was very small in comparison to other countries, a full 45% of this amount remained unused. Instead, the government has relied on the state bank for injecting liquidity through an expansionary monetary policy. In short, the government has embraced standard mainstream economic policy by using monetary measures as a substitute for the desperately needed fiscal activism or the role of the state. There are three main issues with this approach. First, the government is still focused on fiscal consolidation. And this is a term that you are going to increasingly hear coming from the government. What this means is that the government is trying to curtail its expenditure while trying to increase its revenue so that the fiscal deficit can be lowered. But my point is that against the backdrop or against this scenario of massive increase in poverty, the focus on fiscal deficit or fiscal consolidation is misplaced, is wrong. Governments should only focus on alleviating economic misery during crises. Second, research out of Columbia University shows that monetary levers like interest policy are not enough for macroeconomic stability. And finally, evidence from the state bank itself shows that monetary measures have largely failed in stimulating demand. Despite the sound and fury, total credit to private sector is actually down by 0.6% as compared to same time last year. So despite all that they have said, the credit to private sector is actually down. Simply overwhelmed by the pandemic, banks do not deem businesses creditworthy, while businesses are reluctant to borrow given their fear about not being able to service debt. It has now become painfully obvious that standard thinking will not bring about economic recovery in Pakistan. Policymakers will have to go beyond just managing deficits and ratios to designing and implementing effective policies. Modern monetary theory, MMT, a heterodox approach, offers one way out of this impasse. Stephanie Kelson, one of the leading proponents of MMT, argues in The Deficit Myth, this is a book that she has recently authored, that countries that print their own currencies, like Pakistan, should ignore debt to GDP ratios and use their central banks to support public debt, thereby ensuring high employment. In other words, rather than relegating the central bank, MMT sees central banks as enablers for fiscal stimulus. This is my last point, and I want all of you to please pay attention. Pakistan is staring into the abyss of poverty-fueled social unrest. I'm going to say this again for effect. Pakistan is staring into the abyss of poverty-fueled social unrest. Policymakers' thinking and response can only be described as tepid thus far. Economic thinking is changing everywhere in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Pakistani policymakers must follow this trend and design new economic policies in order to save millions of Pakistanis from sliding into poverty. Thank you very much. I will take questions, or maybe somebody wants to moderate the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Afzal, for a wonderful talk. It was really stimulating for me, and I'm sure it was the same for our audience. The floor for question and answers is open now. The audience may type any question in Q&A dashboard, and I would request Dr. Afzal.
I have received some. I have received some questions, and I'm looking at them. So maybe can I? Aziz Ahmed has asked a number of questions, so I will take the first question and I will read it for everybody. He asks, mostly you have discussed ICT-based technology in the context of economy and COVID-19 impacts. Does any policy-related technological development? Yeah, this is a policy question. I don't think I don't think I can answer this in briefly. I mean, this is going to take a long time to answer.
You can go for the second question.
Is there a possibility that people can ask live questions?
So I guess we have this portal only.
Acha. Okay, let me read the next question. Acha. Ehsan Achadzai asks, please comment on no schooling versus online classes during COVID or similar pandemics. Why compare on-site classes with online classes? Achadzai, I'm not comparing on-site classes with online classes. I think that there is no comparison. I'm a professor and I teach for a living. I can tell you that online teaching is not a substitute for in-person teaching. There is no comparison. In-person teaching is 500 million times better than online teaching because so much of the information is given through body language. You can see if somebody is understanding your point or no. And going towards online education is a very big problem in this country. I mean, we just don't have the technical infrastructure. Whereas our policymakers are talking about using online technologies to bring about a revolution. If 1.5% of all the households in this country have a tablet, then what are we talking about? I mean, whose responsibility is it to provide this technical infrastructure to the people? And there are lots of places in Balochistan, for example, I know, where people don't have access to even Wi-Fi. And they were telling me that Wi-Fi is extremely patchy in Turbat. And Turbat is the second biggest city in Balochistan. I think it's a city of what, 2 million people? If not, I mean, I think I'm probably correct in saying that. So it's a pretty decent size city. Imagine a city not having Wi-Fi or internet. तो ये आपके क्वेश्चन का जवाब था. उसके अलावा Aziz Ahmed का क्वेश्चन है, वो पूछ रहे हैं poverty technology nexus in the case of Pakistan, any serious study yet conducted in this regard? जब आप कहते हैं poverty technology nexus, so maybe I think if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the poorer you are, the more you are distant from technology, or the less technologically advanced you are, the more likely it is that you're going to be poor. I don't think there has been a study on this thus far. So maybe that's an area ripe for investigation. Maybe you can write a paper on this or a PhD dissertation, who knows. Let's see if there are any other people who would like to ask any questions. एक और क्वेश्चन आया है मेरा ख्याल में. मंजूर अहमद पूछते हैं कि how COVID-19 has played a role in accumulation in domestic debt, specifically with reference to Pakistan. देखिए जी, domestic debt तो पाकिस्तान का बढ़ता ही चला जा रहा है, और domestic debt जो होता है ना, जो rupee denominated debt होता है, वो कभी भी किसी government के लिए problem नहीं होता, because you can always print and pay people if it's denominated in rupees. Problem कहाँ आता है जब foreign debt लिया हुआ होता है denominated in US dollars. That is a problem for countries, and that is also a problem for us. So ये मैं ये कहूँगा, domestic debt तो कोई ऐसा, government can raise any amount of money, क्योंकि आपने जब उसको सर्विस करना है इंटरेस्ट को, तो आपने नोट छाप के सर्विस कर देना है उसको. Problem is foreign debt denominated in foreign currency.
Sir, I would like to ask a question on behalf of Dr. Faisal. He's asking, in the developing world, we still rely on technology developed in the developed world. It is neither catering the needs in our context, and the high revenue and royalties go directly to the developing world. Isn't it further worsening the economic scenario for the developing world?
Absolutely. I think a very interesting question पूछा है Dr. Faisal ने, and I would expect no less from him. देखें, ये जो सारे सॉफ्टवेयर आ रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में, अब जैसे हमारी यूनिवर्सिटी ने, हबीब यूनिवर्सिटी, आई थिंक वाज द फर्स्ट यूनिवर्सिटी in this country to employ a very expensive learning management system called Canvas. तो अब इसकी जो इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स हैं, या जो भी हम ये विंडोज और ये सब कुछ जूम जो हम यूज कर रहे हैं, जिसमें हम बात कर रहे हैं, इस सब की रॉयल्टीज तो हमें पे करनी पड़ रही हैं. तो आई मीन इसका मुतबादिल क्या है इसका? वी डोंट हैव एनीथिंग टू, आई मीन वी डोंट हैव डोमेस्टिकली डेवलप्ड जूम, कि कोई पाकिस्तानी जूम हो जिसको हम यूज कर लें. चाइनीज सिस्टम्स अगर इस तरह के बन गए हैं, मुझे नहीं पता, मे बी वी कैन टॉक टू द चाइनीज एंड गेट अ फ्री वर्जन, बट या आई मीन इससे ज़ेर मुबादला जो फॉरेन एक्सचेंज है वो डेफिनेटली बाहर जा रहा है. तो इनका पॉइंट बिल्कुल ठीक है डॉक्टर फैसल का.
Sir, another question from Dr. Faisal. Communication infrastructure in the developing world is a challenge, and it might remain the same for a long time in the future. What would you suggest to the important stakeholder with regard to future preparedness in terms of tech and communication infrastructure?
देखें, टेक एंड कम्युनिकेशन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर तो एक चीज़ है. इस मुल्क में, इस सोसाइटी में तालीम की जो क्वालिटी है ना, एक तो ये देखें, आपको पता है टोटल नंबर ऑफ टोटल स्टूडेंट्स जो पाकिस्तान में, यानी किंडरगार्टन मॉन्टेसरी से लेके मास्टर्स पीएचडी तक, वो नंबर है 50 मिलियन इस वक्त. 50 मिलियन का मतलब है कितने हो गए? 5 करोड़ टोटल स्टूडेंट. और कितने बच्चे स्कूल से बाहर हैं इस वक्त जिनको स्कूल में होना चाहिए? 23 मिलियन, 2.5 करोड़. अब ये छोटा नंबर नहीं है. आप कम्युनिकेशन की बात में बात करें, आप टेक्नोलॉजी की बात में बात करें, सबसे पहले यू हैव टू ब्रिंग दीज चिल्ड्रन टू अ स्कूल. दिस शुड बी नंबर 1 प्रायोरिटी. मैं इसके बारे में बहुत परेशान हूँ कि ये कैसा माशरा है कि जहाँ पे आपका फ्यूचर जो है वो सड़कों के ऊपर भीख मांग रहा है. दैट्स नंबर 1 प्रायोरिटी. और नंबर 2, क्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशन, यानी कि जब आप compete करें दुनिया से, तो don't compete in how big our army is or how far the missiles can go. आप compete करें मैथ्स की और रीडिंग स्कोर्स के अंदर. आप दुनिया में उठा के देखें, आपको हाईएस्ट नंबर्स मैथ और रीडिंग के कहाँ नजर आएंगे? जापान, साउथ कोरिया, ताइवान, इन कंट्रीज में नजर आएंगे आपको. हमारे मुल्क में जितने भी सर्विस हुए हैं, टीचर्स को डबल डिविजन मल्टीप्लिकेशन नहीं आती. So if you think that somehow we are going to become an economic powerhouse by having a very substandard system of education where 23 million children are out of school, it is not going to happen. You cannot compete economically if you cannot compete in terms of your academic outcomes. ये नंबर 1 चीज है जिसको एड्रेस करना है. नंबर 1 चीज.
We'll just take one last question. How to increase tax GDP ratio by using technology in Pakistan?
हाँ, उसके इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन है। देखें, ये बहुत आसानी से ये चीजें हो सकती हैं, इनके लिए पॉलिटिकल विल चाहिए होती है। जैसे मैं 10 साल पहले when I visited Japan, I saw something very interesting। आपको पता है यहाँ पे हमारे मुल्क में एक बहुत बड़ा मसला ये है कि ये जो बिलिंग है ना, ये जो इलेक्ट्रिसिटी के बिल्स हैं, ये वापस नहीं आते, 20-25% चोरी हो जाती है। तो मैंने जापान में ये देखा कि वहां पे क्या होता था कि यू वुड बाय अ स्क्रैच कार्ड, जैसे आप मोबाइल का कार्ड खरीदते हैं, यू वुड स्क्रैच इट, और आप वो मीटर के अंदर से उसको स्वाइप करते थे, और जितने का वो कार्ड होता था उतना वो मीटर चलता था बिजली का, और फिर दैट्स इट। तो ये जो सारी this entire expansion in the mobile telephony in this country has only been possible because of prepaid mobile phones. If the same companies were running after people to get bills, you could never see this kind of mushrooming. So I think that's one thing that we can probably use as in technology, that areas where people, where there is a lot of theft, you could introduce these smart meters. You know, you buy a scratch card from the market, you scratch it, और उसको आप स्वाइप करें, वो उतनी ही बिजली दे जितने का आपने पैसे डाले हैं, आपके प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व हो जाएंगे। ये टेक्नोलॉजी 10 साल पहले मैंने देखी थी जापान में, तो इट्स नॉट अ न्यू टेक्नोलॉजी। तो टेक्नोलॉजी अवेलेबल है, विल नहीं है ये काम करने के लिए।
Thank you for the questions. Once again, I would like to thank Dr. Agdas Afzal for his precious time and a very thrilling talk on the post-COVID-19 world.